In this video, I'm going to cover some common, simple repairs for the Johnson Millennium JM-150 and 250 amplifiers. I'm basing the judgment of what is meant by common on the frequency of emails I get asking questions relating to the specific issues. I'm not going through every detail of every repair, but offering you some starting points, and if you have basic tools and a little electronics or soldering experience, you can do them yourself. You might also find out something that helps the tech you're paying on an hourly basis to solve your problem more quickly. Every repair can be done using the video disassembling for repairs and maintenance found in this video's description as a starting point, and please, heed the warnings detailed in the beginning of that video prior to actually attempting anything discussed in this video. If you have additional questions, I actually am asking that you post them in the comments because of the overlap of many questions I've been receiving in my inbox. But as an alternative, you can still contact me through the form in the footer of my website, which is www.bosleymusic.com. Symptoms: scratchy sound when turning the master volume, no sound when the master volume is turned to certain positions, unbalanced stereo image at certain volumes. Repair: master volume knob replacement. The number one problem people ask me about on the Johnson Millennium amplifiers is the scratchy master volume pot, and that's why I'm discussing it first. This problem runs rampant in these amps no matter what you do to protect your amp at home, in the studio, and during transport. The first 8 or so years that I used these amps was mainly in some brutal Midwest winters, and I've always suspected that the culprit might be the expansion and contraction of the chassis with heat and cold, pulling the component to and from the mainboard, which it's attached to, as it experiences temperature changes. The correct master volume and contour pots are available through Digitech or other part sources. After removing the mainboard, you'll need to desolder the components. I do this with a desoldering tool and apply flux liberally to aid in the suction of solder off of the contacts. If you don't have a desoldering tool, you can use solder wick with a standard iron to do all of the removal. If you find removal to be difficult, you can also cut the pot away from the board using a pair of end cutters, and then you're only left with the removal of the pins. Hot air is also a feasible method, however, be cautious that you do not overheat or shock and thus damage the PC board. The board itself is multi-layer and solder runs all the way through the board, so desoldering may be more difficult if you're only used to single-sided boards. In this example, I'm also replacing the contour pot at the same time as the master volume. Once you have the pot or pots removed, you'll need to clean the pads of any remaining solder. Again, this can be done with solder wick, with the application of flux and some patience, and ensure you do it to both sides of the board. Once all solder is removed, clean any flux residue on the pads with alcohol wipes or the board prep solution of your choice, insert the new pots, and solder away. Symptoms: low volume, clip LED isn't lighting, unresponsive, gritty tone. Repair: tube replacement. Alternate repairs: jack replacement, input potentiometer. Generally, this is the result of one of 3 main things, and they are all on the very front of the amp. First off, how new or old are your tubes? Depending on the frequency of use of the amp and the last time you changed them, this is often the answer to every symptom listed. You can see how to change tubes by clicking the embedded link. The second possibility: are your input jacks worn out? Although you might still be getting sound, sometimes worn jacks can exhibit a varied frequency response or some signal loss based on poor contact being made between the tip of your cable and the jack. If you typically only use the normal input, try plugging into the bright or vice versa to see if your signal is stronger. Number 3, is the input pot worn out? You should be able to test the pot using a multimeter and determine if this is the culprit. Replacement is just like that of the master volume pot. Lastly, if sound is strong and clear, but the LED isn't lighting, you should check the LED itself. Beyond these things, you may be having a deeper issue and you should consult a technician. Symptoms: flashing or jumpy numbers. Controls are jumpy when encoders are turned. Repairs: encoder replacement, 7-segment replacement, logic IC replacement. Encoders are different from pots as they output a combination of high and low states, not a continuous voltage. The Johnson Millennium uses 2-bit 24-position encoders. Without boring you to death with details, the simplest explanation I can give is that in order to determine the direction of turn or value of the encoder, a decoder must be used to resolve a combination of these high and low states. If the LEDs are flickering, you may just need to replace the 7-segment LED itself. You can test the LEDs using a VOM or diode checker to find out if individual segments are burned out. If the issue you're experiencing is one of jumpy numbers when the encoders are turned but otherwise steady, I would recommend replacing the encoders. If the numbers are just generally bouncing, both when the encoders are turning or stationary, it's a significantly more difficult problem to hunt down. The encoders and LEDs are extremely simple components in and of themselves, but the logic functions surrounding them in the amplifier are not. There are three main logic ICs involved: 74HC574s, which are octal D-type edge-triggered flip-flops, generally used for debouncing and switching applications; 74HC244s, which are line drivers. They can provide a buffer between controls, logic, and power supplies; 74HC139s, decoder demultiplexers, which break apart encoded signals into source information. I would start with those using a logic probe or analyzer to double-check functionality, and if the problem can't be located there, these digital lines are also connected to the EEPROM, SDISC, and SRAM. I've fortunately never experienced this problem, but a lot of people have been emailing me about it recently, and I can only say this: replacing the encoders in the same fashion as I discussed the master volume is a possible solution, but again, it may not work, and at that point, it's no longer a simple repair. You may want to consult a technician, and in all honesty, a computer or embedded engineer may be a better option than your local guitar shop. Symptom: display illuminates, but the rest of the amp won't turn on. Secondary question: is it possible the power amp was blown? Simply disconnecting the power supply's connection to the power amp will allow all other functions on the amp to run if this is where the problem exists. You'll still be able to get sound from the XLR outputs, but no sound to the speakers. With the unit open, you can disconnect the power harness running from the supply to the power amp and attempt to power on. If the unit runs once you have done this, try using the XLR outs, and if you have sound, the problem is narrowed to the power amp. Likely problems in the power amp are loose connections and blown capacitors, which will usually be visibly damaged or give off a fishy smell in the case of electrolytics, which are often constructed using a form of fish oil. But in many cases of power amp failure, you've burned out one or more of the transistors. I would recommend taking the power amp to a tech because there are a number of steps you need to follow with things like baking the new transistors to free them of moisture prior to soldering that require a little more precision than the standard electronics hobbyist can pull off. Symptom: my amp shuts off during operation and reboots. Repair: the infamous C13 repair. I had this happen with two of my units, and it's a simple repair, although you should heed the warnings about power supply safety made in the disassembling and maintenance reference video to the T with this one. For some reason, one lead on one capacitor broke in two of my units, and other people seem to have the same problem, particularly with earlier models of the amp. The rebooting will usually only happen while you are playing. The vibration created by the speakers literally rattles the capacitor back and forth so that it makes contact and loses contact between the part of the lead still attached to the PC board and the portion of the broken lead on the cap itself. Removing the power supply, again heeding the warnings provided in the sister video, and replacing this component will likely solve your problem. Symptoms: noisy fan rattles. Repairs: check screws, nuts, and washers for firmness. Replace fan's adhesive tape. Replace fan. The simple solution is to first check and ensure the assembly is properly fastened to the chassis. Sometimes the nuts attached to the screw posts holding the assembly to the back of the amp can become loose, or I even had one which cracked off during a gear unloading and had to replace the screw posts and nut to get the fan to stop rattling. The fan itself, although it has screws running through it, is essentially taped to the assembly, and over time it loosens. Replacing this adhesive can help dampen vibrations. Clean your fan out regardless of whether you think it is broken or not to help keep the unit clean. If the fan blade itself is extremely noisy, you may also need to replace the fan, and that's fairly simple. You should be able to obtain the same DC fan from a computer parts or other electronics store that has the right voltage and size specifications. The fan is a 12 volt 200 mA brushless DC type. The fan is powered directly from the power supply using the terminals pictured. You can either choose to solder the fan leads directly to the power supply, or use the connectors from your old fan and solder, then shrink wrap them to the leads of your new fan. Symptoms: if your master volume pot is good. Unbalanced stereo image. Sound disappears on one side with panning effects. Sound disappears in the center of the stereo image with auto pan. Repairs: check speaker polarity, check speakers, power amp failure, worst case and unlikely. Sometimes when an amp has been worked on, the speakers get hooked up backwards and reconnecting, and this phase inversion can cause some patches to sound drastically different. Ensure your speaker cables are correctly attached. If you have, for instance, a patch that works one speaker harder than the other, you may be wearing out one speaker more quickly. As an example, if you pitch shift the guitar down one octave out of the left, but leave the right in standard pitch, and use this patch often, you're likely wearing out the one speaker faster than the other. If you have to replace a speaker, I recommend doing it in pairs to maintain a more closely matched stereo pair. Reconing kits are also available and usually cost anywhere from 30 to 50% of the original speaker's cost, depending on the supplier, rather than spending more money on a total replacement. Generally, if the power amp has failed, the amp wouldn't even boot, so power amp failure is unlikely, but it is possible that one side's performance changes in relation to the other over the lifespan of the amplifier, as components such as capacitors and resistors values also drift over time and with use. Thanks for watching. If you have additional comments or questions, please feel free to post them in the comments, or contact me through the form in the footer of my website, which is www.bosleymusic.com.